Government accounting, I know, sounds a little dry, doesn't it? But what if I told you it's actually a story about transparency and, well, whether a country is telling the truth about its own money? We're going to dive in because the way a government counts its money, it can change absolutely everything. It all really boils down to this one single massive question. It's not just about, how much cash you have in the bank today. It's about knowing the full picture. Everything you own, everything you owe, and all the promises you've made for the future. And for a very long time, most governments just weren't telling that full story. So to really understand the quiet revolution that's been happening in public finance, we first have to get our heads around the two different ways of keeping the books. You could almost call it a tale of two very different ledgers. Okay, so the old way is called cash accounting. Think of it exactly like a simple checkbook. Money comes in, money goes out. Super simple, right? But it is not the whole story. The new way is accrual accounting. Now, this is more like a complete net worth statement for an entire country. It tracks everything it owns, every single debt it has, and every promise it's made for the future, like pensions. And here is the crucial point. The old cash method has this massive, massive blind spot. A government could look totally fine on paper right now, but meanwhile, a literal mountain of debt and future bills is just piling up, completely off the books. And at the same time, it just ignores the value of all the public assets, the roads, bridges, and buildings that are a huge part of a nation's wealth. This problem was so big, so significant, that the world really needed a solution, a new gold standard for how governments report their finances, one that was designed from the ground up for clarity and, well, for honesty. And that solution is called IPSAS. The easiest way to think of it is like a universal language for government money. It's a set of really strict, internationally agreed upon rules that basically forces governments to switch to that full picture accrual method. It makes sure everyone is reporting their numbers in the same transparent way. Which brings us to our case study for today. On January 1st, 2016, Nigeria officially decided to make this enormous switch. They committed to adopting IPSS, and in doing so, they joined a global movement of countries that were choosing to open up their books and give a much clearer financial picture to their own citizens and the world. But how does a whole country actually do this? You can't just flip a switch overnight on an entire nation's finances. Well, it turns out there's a specific playbook, a guide, designed for countries making this journey for the very first time. And that whole playbook, it really all comes down to one number. 33. IPSAS 33. This is the one. It's the specific standard, the user manual, that walks a government through the incredibly complex process of moving from that simple cash checkbook to a full-blown accrual balance sheet for the very first time. It's designed to make a truly monumental task manageable. And a playbook like this is absolutely essential, because creating that first all-encompassing balance sheet for an entire nation, well, that is a truly Herculean effort. Just try to imagine the sheer scale of this. A government has to find and put a value on everything. Every single road, every school, every piece of military hardware. Then they have to track down every single long-term liability, from foreign loans to pension promises that were made decades ago. And all of this has to come together into one single unified document, the opening statement of financial position. So how is it done? Well, that IPSS 33 playbook lays out a pretty clear path. First, you close out the old cash-based books for good. Then, the real work starts. You have to recognize all those new assets and liabilities. Step 3 is applying the rules to measure them all correctly. And then finally, all of that work comes together in the new, transparent, opening balance sheet. But here is probably the most important part of the whole rulebook. The people who designed IPSAS 33, they understood just how massive this task was. So they built in a crucial bit of breathing room. They gave first-time adopters a 3-year transitional relief period. This grace period, this is the key that makes the whole switch possible. It gives governments time to tackle the really huge challenges, like how do you figure out the value of a 50-year-old highway when the original cost records are long gone? The rules allow you to use something called a deemed cost, which is basically a practical, fair estimate to use as a stand-in. It's that kind of common-sense flexibility that prevents the whole process from just getting stuck. So we've talked about the why and the how, but let's bring it all home. What does this shift from these abstract numbers on a page actually mean in the real world? Well, it means accountability. The difference is just night and day. You go from only seeing the cash in the bank to seeing all of the nation's assets. You go from a simple log of today's spending to a full accounting of all liabilities, including those big future promises. At the end of the day, you go from an incomplete and maybe even misleading picture to a true statement of the country's net worth. And this is why you should care. This switch gives everyone, citizens, lawmakers, investors, a true, honest picture of the government's financial health. It empowers you to ask tough questions and hold leaders accountable for how they manage the nation's wealth and its debts. It helps lawmakers make smarter, more informed decisions about our future, and it builds critical trust with international partners and investors. Ultimately, this whole thing transforms government accounting from just a simple record of cash flow into a powerful story about a nation's past, its present, and the promises it has made for its future. So the final question is, what story are your government's numbers telling?